Hello. Good morning. The reason that I decided to speak on this topic was partly due to a song that I heard on the way home from work. Um, I'm the DJ of our hospital, so I play one song a day. Usually it's upbeat, and so I'd asked my dad for the name of Mumford and Sons. I'd forgotten their name, and I listened to a couple of their songs, and then I listened to a song that had the lyric, "I will wait for you," and it was over and over again. And because of a couple of things that had happened at work that day, I wept. I wept and wept and wept as I drove, just because of the idea of "I will wait" is both something that may happen, that I'll wait to a loved one, I'll return to me. But in some cases, the waiting doesn't pay off, or the waiting doesn't be fulfilled. And so people who've lost loved ones, and so the waiting is fairly tragic. And also, like, we're waiting for everything to go back to normal, or we're waiting to go back in time to our old lives. And it may not be like that. And so the song caused me to weep, both because of the beauty of the wait. And I think the wait for God to return is compelling and captivating. The wait for the next time I see my parents and my niece is great. But the tears are often shed for the wait doesn't end, that we keep waiting, that we don't get what we want. The Bible at a time of crisis is a wonderful document. It was written by a range of people throughout a range of different cultures and places, usually to comfort people in a crisis. So Revelation, crisis. Some of the Gospels were written to people in crisis. Paul directed his letters to people who were in a crisis. And even I think Moses wrote the books of Moses for a time where the people were finding their feet again. And a lot of people think that Moses' works were compiled a lot later, but that's here not there. It was written to comfort people in a time like ours. So I wanted to take you through Moses' life, if that's okay, just because I think at the end of his life is what I'm working towards, but there's all sorts of things that teach us good stuff. So Moses' first action as he was born was to be kicked out of home. Think of that. And we'll find out later, Moses was born and then chucked in the river in a wicker basket, pretty much leave. And this was raised by probably his mum in the Pharaoh's palace. He was probably bilingual. He was probably educated because he had education and he's called. But he was born and raised in Egypt. He then committed a murder of one of his colleagues, one of the Israelites, and struck the man dead and ran away and lived again outside of home. So he got kicked out from his parents' family into Egypt and the Pharaoh's palace. When he grew up, probably till the age of 40, ran off into the bush. And I think he spent 40 years. One of the highlights of his life was when he came face to face with God in a burning bush. And God invited him there, introduced himself, gave him his mission for the rest of his life. He said, I want you to bring my people out of Egypt, and I want you to bring them out into the wilderness, and then they can worship me. And then he did the 10 plagues. Even though he doubted God and his ability to be the leader, he was always given a right-hand man who was more eloquent than he was, but he was the leader. And he took the people through the 10 plagues, which were, I told Sheldon this story the other night, but the 10 plagues were amazing. They destroyed an economy, they destroyed all the major pillars of the nation, frogs, boils, storms, darkness, and the death of the firstborn of all the Egyptians. Pretty full-on stuff, and Moses was at the heart of that. The Exodus. Finally Pharaoh got sick of them and kicked them out. And the people got sick of them and gave them all their treasure and kicked them out. As they left, as they got into the wilderness, they were then chased by the Pharaoh through between walls of water that God stopped happen in the Red Sea, which is a phenomenal miracle. Moses, again, was ahead of that. Moses has 4 books, pretty much. His life spanned 4 books in the Bible, which is amazing. At times, as I was thinking through his life, I was thinking, is this the same person? Like, is this the same person we started reading about back in Exodus 1? Because it just keeps going and going and going. And most of the story is in his last 40 years, from, I guess, the age of 80 to the age of 120. Don't we all wish we're that productive at 80? So they get through the Red Sea. They go towards the Promised Land. They send some spies in, and the spies terrify them. They bring them stories of these giants, of a lot of difficulty in taking the land. And so God just says, well, you're not ready. You're going to spend 40 years in the wilderness, wandering around and becoming dependent on me. And so get ready for it. But you're going to walk for 40 years before you get to go into battle. And so that was a chief disappointment of Moses. He brought it up later in his life that he wished he got in that time. That he missed out on the Promised Land twice, and he looked back on the first one and thought, if only we got through that. Then he was in charge of the 10 Commandments. He got given the 10 Commandments. And then when he, in anger, he did them again, wrote them out, I think, by hand. And the 10 Commandments represented a bigger set of laws that God commanded the people to follow. Some of the laws were one-off. They needed to be followed while 1 million people are camping in tents. And it didn't matter as much when they went to the land. Some of the laws were important in that culture, in that place. And then some of the laws, probably a select few, were good for everybody for all time. And if you read it through, it's interesting to pick up which is which. You might be familiar with, there was a gold calf that they melted all their gold into, and then Moses chopped it up and put it in their drinking water. Moses set up a lot of the traditions, the festival days, the feast of things like tabernacles. That Moses also dealt with conflict. That many times during the 40 years, his leadership was questioned. He was challenged, both as a representative of God, because the people challenged God, and also because they at times thought Moses was incompetent. And so he got through all of that. Also, there was a story of the reason that is given for Moses not getting into the promised land was because at one point God told him to make water come out of the rock and give all the people water. And Moses, instead of commanding water, hit the rock, and water came out of the rock regardless, because the people needed water. But he was seen to take over from God, to not be in charge, but he was in charge because he struck the rock and he made it happen. And so for that was the reason given that he didn't go into the promised land, which is a disappointment on 120 years of life well lived, to lose out on your dream on a single, what looks like a single act of thoughtlessness, a lack of self-control, is sad. But it seems that that's what happened. So this man, Moses, started homeless, finished homeless, and yet he's the hero, one of the heroes of the Old Testament, one of the heroes of faith. He's the leader of 3 major religions, probably respected by more. So how did he deal with disappointment? How did he deal with not getting what he wanted, which was the title of the sermon? A lot of people have used the Exodus and the 40 years in the wilderness to describe most of the changes that happen in our lives. And what happened over and over again in the 40 years were the people, and it happened from day one, but the people started saying, we want to go back. We want to go back to Egypt, where we had food, where we had work, where we had shelter, where we had comfort. And they said it over and over again. And Moses just kept on telling them, we were left there because it was terrible. But also we left there because we were going somewhere better. And in all sorts of ways, when we make improvements, there's always the threat or the dream of going back to the old me. So in our case, it's the pre-COVID life, where we could hug anyone we wanted, we could hang out in crowds of 100,000, where we could travel freely, like all of that. You may have made personal decisions to stop sinning, or to lose weight, or to make progress in a skill. And there's always the draw back to sloth or overeating or not trying as hard, or and so Moses, all the way through his life, there was this tension between going back and going forward, and seeking God and just running home to where he wanted to be back a while ago. So just keep that in mind. It's a great teaching from the Exodus that the progress is made by going forward and not going back, and not being captivated by what life was like back then. And your disappointment at what happens in the next 12 months may be helped, or it may not be as painful if you just drop what happened for the last 10 years. That you put out of your mind what life used to be like, because we're into a new world. So what would you be like if you faced what your whole life was working towards, and then right at the end you got told you couldn't have your dream? Think about that for a minute. I'm not sure whether any of you have failed at anything. I guess most of us complete the education we set out to. Many of us start the families that we want. Many of us achieve most of the goals we set. But there are those things where we don't get them. We don't achieve them. We can't have children. We don't get the dream job. We have to quit a lot of people will probably quit education. Like, I had somebody quit training that I was providing the other day just because they couldn't get into the online learning, and it's hard enough to deliver it. But how would you be? How would you be faced with seeing your dream as close to your hands, like you can almost grab it, and you don't get it? I'm just going to read a passage in chapter 34 of Deuteronomy, and this is in the end of chapter 22. It's explained why Moses isn't going into the promised land. That you rebelled by smashing the rock, not keeping things holy, and you won't be going into the promised land. Then Moses writes a song. And so he sings a song to the people, and it was partly a history lesson, and it was partly a warning that they don't do what they'd done in the past, and they don't rebel against God like they did 40 years ago. And then at the start of chapter 34, it says this: Then Moses went up from the main plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him the whole land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all of the land of Judah as far as the western sea. That is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zor. The Lord said to him, This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over here. Then Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the Lord's command. He was buried in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his burial place to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His sight was unimpaired, and his vigor was not lessened. The Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. then the period of mourning for Moses had ended. So think of that. You get so close to your dream that God walks you up a mountain, puts his hand around your shoulders and says, look at your dream. Look from the south to the north. That's all what you were hoping to go to. But you're not going in. You're going to die here. Like if we didn't know that God was a good God and a just and a kind God, you'd see that as really quite manipulative or even mean, to show somebody their dream and then stop them going into it. But it doesn't read like that. The text reads as if this is just a good way to die, a good way to finish life. That I've got as close as I was going to get, and I'm going to die here. So I want to go back a bit, just because I think one of the things that Christians should do better than anyone is deal with disappointment and difficulty with class. And part of the reason I think that is because Jesus on the cross showed a lot of self-control, love, and peace in a way that I don't think many of us can easily do, but it sets the standard of what a Christian is to do. So if Moses can deal with disappointment, if Moses can deal with a new world, and we're entering a new world every day, then how do we act with class and godliness? So firstly, I just wanted to say a couple of things. The title of the sermon was, what happens when you don't get what you want? So a couple of things. At times, what we want is bad for us. So the people of Israel wanted to go back to Egypt. That would be bad for them. Slavery was bad, but they just forgot that slavery was bad because they remembered that they had food there and they got bored of the food here. At times, what we want is impossible. At times, we might actually take joy in others getting what they want, and that's enough. And I think this is where Moses was. See, Moses took joy in the fact that everybody else got to the land. If he hadn't died beforehand, he would have applauded them as they walked into the new Israel. And so sometimes if we don't get our dream, we can still appreciate others getting theirs. People who have the education we wished we had, people who have the families or the wealth or the ability to do fun stuff. We can enjoy the fact that they can do it without being shattered that we can't. But some of the things that Moses did here were just lovely. Firstly, he encourages them not to make the same mistakes. See, I don't think it was a one-off that Moses struck the rock. I think his whole life had shown this sort of stuff. I think when he was 40, he killed a man. And I think that would be enough to rule him out of walking into the promised land. I think he threw the 10 Commandments on the ground just in a fit of anger, and that was probably more righteous anger. But throughout his life, there were these times that he just lost. He lost his self-control, and I think in this time he's encouraging them to do things differently. So he encourages them not to make the same mistakes. And I want to tell you, every decision you make has the power to change your life. Like angry words, angry actions can do a great deal of harm. Ignoring people can do a great deal of harm. yeah. There's a passage in the New Testament that said, take every opportunity for the days are evil, because both the doing of good and the not doing of evil are all really important. So Moses encourages people not to make the same mistakes he does. He blesses them. The whole of chapter 32 is a song that's a warning. The whole of chapter 33 is a song that blesses them. And he just chooses them by name and tells them that God will take care of them. And he asks God to listen and do good to everybody. So like when you're miserable, when you're disappointed, to be able to focus on other people and bless other people and wish good for people over the next 100 years is really top shelf, okay? And so at times when you're miserable, that's something that may change you away from feeling miserable, to think of other people's well-being. Thirdly, so he encourages them not to make the same mistakes. He blesses them with song. Thirdly, he mentors and anoints another leader. So he takes Joshua under his arms. Now, Aaron has already died. Miriam has already died. He's left with Joshua. And Joshua goes on to be one of the best leaders in the Bible. And it's partly because Moses trained him and then he empowered him. He doesn't change his clothes like Elijah and Elisha does, but there was a ceremony where God put his favour on Joshua. But last of all, the last thing that I think Moses did is he realised the real inheritance, okay? Now, you may not know that Israel at one point got very conceited about their state, their land, their temple, their Sabbath. Lots of these identification markers, and they thought that that was what gave them strength. And they forgot that it was actually God. There were 12 tribes that inherited the land. The Levites never inherited land because it was seen that their inheritance was God himself. So would you want land to inherit, or would you prefer God to inherit? Okay? So imagine you're Moses. You're standing up on this hill. After 120 years of homelessness, you're looking at a home where you can stay there for the next 1,000 years. And you die on the doorway of that house. And you're content because you die with God. You inherit God. Do you see that? Do you see how disappointment in quite a big deal could really be about getting closer to God? Okay? So with COVID, I don't know whether we'll get all our liberties back. I love Shai and I love Shai's family, and I want to be in Singapore once a year for the rest of my life. If I don't get back to that, I'll be quite sad. But I don't know what the future holds. I don't know whether my work will remain the same. I don't know whether children will be able to play on playgrounds. But what I do know is that Moses stood at the edge of the promised land and he wasn't shattered because he was inheriting God. And so whatever happens, and I hope our lives go back to normal, but if they don't, if we're in a state of being on edge, not knowing what the future holds, not getting all sorts of things that we want, know that your inheritance is God. There's many things that you can do in a pandemic. You can encourage people to not make mistakes like you did. That's what Moses did. You can bless people. You can write people's songs like Moses did. Or you can just bless them by writing them cards. I hope you're going well. I hope God blesses you doing this and this and this. Yeah, I think you can mentor or anoint another leader. If you're in leadership, you can train somebody else to do similarly, and you can get closer to God. In a pandemic, there's nothing to stop you getting closer to God.